Hail, and welcome back to my Gods and Goddesses series. Today, in this third video, this third entry into this series, we will be discussing the Egyptian god of magic, among other things. His name is Thoth, or Thoth, or Thoth. So, he is probably one of the more well-known of the Egyptian gods. Thoth is, as I mentioned, the Egyptian god of magic, the Egyptian god of the sciences, of, among other things, astronomy, of writing, of the moon, and of diplomacy, of mathematics, and of various other things. Maybe he is not the most well-known god, to the general public, perhaps not as well known as Isis, Osiris, Ra, and Horus, and maybe even Bastet, or Bast, if you will. But he certainly is going to be one of the more well-known deity among magicians, and certainly those that work with the Egyptian pantheon, or who have at some point in their lives perhaps studied the workings of Aleister Crowley, because Aleister Crowley has, of course, written about Thoth. There is, of course, the Book of Thoth, and various other things that are related to Thoth, or in more recent times have been attributed to Thoth, or in some way, shape, or form have been named after this particular deity. And I feel that this is a very fitting thing. I personally like to think I have a pretty good relationship with this particular deity. In my personal opinion, he is a very, very kind-hearted, very straight-to-the-point individual, but we will get on that a little bit later. First, we will, of course, describe his general characteristics, spheres of influence, etc. Thoth is said to be self-created in myths. Now, this varies, of course, because creation myths vary a little bit. But in some renditions of the creation myths, Thoth is the one that is self-created and that lays the egg of creation. Suffice to say that there are various different renditions of the origins of Thoth and how he came about. But one thing is certainly certain: if you read all these different variations, which you can look into, you will find that there is a element always of Thoth being brought about in a most unconventional manner that is not like most beings or deities are said to have, for example, parents, a father and a mother, or that they were created by a singular deity in some way, shape, or form, who then, for example, like Athena, who came from the forehead of Zeus and stuff like that. But there is always that element of an unnatural to our understanding birth, if you will. So Thoth is often depicted as having the head of an ibis, sometimes as a buffoon, but what you will usually see is that he has the head of an ibis. He has like many Egyptian gods, you will see this anthropomorphic imagery of him displayed in hieroglyphs, where he holds a staff, and he is, dressed in like a loincloth, I guess you would call it, and his lower half is, from the neck down, is depicted as being human, and then his head is depicted as having either the head of an ibis or as a buffoon, like I said. So that is basically what Thoth is often depicted as. He is, like I mentioned, among other things, the god of the moon, of writing, of magic, of various sciences such as mathematics, astronomy. He is also said to be the god of diplomacy, and you will find in many myths that he is the mediator in various contests, such as between, I believe, Horus and Set. Where you will find myths that they have like equal, they're supposed to have equal footing in various contests, and that Horus and Set are healed by Thoth to make these contests fairer every time that they engage in it. And so Thoth is also therefore attributed as being a god of healers, and this will often be in modern days, of course, as well, but also in magic. Make him a god of healing, because you obviously will find him related to various healing magics, but you will also find him related to, of course, healing sciences, such as being a physician, or perhaps in modern times, now that we know more about it, you could even invoke him if you wish to become a psychologist, such as I am currently doing. He is also said to be associated with the judgment of the god of the dead, much like Osiris is. He is the husband of the goddess Ma'at, or the goddess of balance, or the goddess of cosmic order, or justice. She is also said to be the goddess of truth, which I find a very interesting mix with Thoth. Because obviously sciences and the quest for truth go hand in hand. Science is the pursuit of knowledge, the pursuit of facts, the pursuit of things that are objectively true. So mathematics is certainly a very prime example of that, because math is cold, hard, and logical. With math there is pretty much no room for interpretation. So the fact that Ma'at and Thoth are said to be spouses, or consorts, if you will, or married, is interesting to me in that sense. In alchemy, it is often said that Hermes Trismegistus was a combination of the Egyptian god Thoth and the Greek god Hermes. Thoth, as I mentioned, is related to the moon, as well as a typical lunar deity, which is depicted in his headdress, where you will see that he carries a lunar disc on his headdress, compared to deities such as Sekhmet, such as Isis, such as Horus, Ra, I believe as well, who all carry solar discs in between their solar discs on their headdresses. So with this brief summary of the things that he presides over out of the way, I would like to briefly discuss, as I have done with previous videos on deities, my personal experiences with Thoth. Thoth, in my experience, is a very friendly, very compassionate, but also at the same time very logical individual, who exercises, in my experience, a lot of patience. But this is a trait that I have found a lot with the Egyptian pantheon in general. They are rather understanding and very generous and kind in general. Is my personal experience with this. He appears to have a lot of sympathy. He also seems to be able to couple this sympathy with logic. For example, if you don't feel entirely right, or if you are bothered by certain mental issues or emotional issues at the time, and you converse with him, he seems to, in conversations with him, he seems to be able to just very logically reflect back to you what is wrong with you, and why you are feeling this way from a very compassionate but yet very objective standpoint. And in this I find it, of course, very interesting that he is a god of sciences, and thus probably, obviously understands much more of certain things, of mechanics, of how things work, not just limited to, but including the human brain, the human psyche, the human spirit, if you will. And therefore is able to, display a very unique, interesting sort of understanding and compassion and engagement with human beings, I feel. So, in my experience working with him from a magical perspective, I think that his prizes for, things that he asks are often very to the point, very solid, very fair, very just, as befits, I suppose, the husband of the goddess of justice and truth. So, I mean, he's definitely a deity that I would approach for magical knowledge, and for all the other things that we will be discussing in a second. So it is, as I mentioned, safe to say that Thoth is the deity, or one of the few deities that you will want to go for assistance with sciences, for if you are studying, for example, to be a physician, if you are studying to be a mathematician, if you are like me studying to be a psychologist, if you are studying to be a physicist perhaps, or an astronomer, or any and all other hard sciences that are, very left-brained, or perceived to be quote-unquote left-brained sciences. But on the other hand, Thoth is also someone who you can absolutely go to as being the god of magic, for more right-brain sciences. Not necessarily so for arts, I would say, in that sense, but more from a magical perspective. In that I feel that Thoth is, of course, also going to have knowledge of astrology. That's, of course, different from astronomy, which is the observation and calculation of movement of planets and planetary bodies, etc., etc. But astrology in the sense of horoscopes and all that sort of stuff, and how they affect things from an energetic perspective. He would be a great deity to basically talk to about, alchemy. As I said, Hermes Trismegistus was said to be basically the figurehead, I suppose, of alchemy. Was said to be a mix between Thoth and the Greek Hermes. So he would absolutely be able to help you with alchemy, with geometric magic, with mathematical magic, and stuff like that. If you have interest in learning that, if you have interest in learning numerology, if you have interest in, well, really pretty much any sort of system, although, for example, I would say that if you were to, like I'm doing, being initiated into the runes, into a specific set of runes, into the Elder Futhark in my case, I would absolutely say that you should go to the particular pantheon, the particular deity in that pantheon that is set to preside over that particular system of initiation into the higher mysteries. That said, I do get the impression that Thoth, being the Egyptian god of magic, the Egyptian pantheon, obviously having been around for a very long time, having engaged with pantheons pretty much the world over, most likely, that he is a very good deity to go to in terms of just learning just about anything. I mean, for example, if you want to get real technical, my initiation into the Elder Futhark started with Lord Agarus from the Ars Gusha, all the way back in the 16th century, and not in my current life, where I just decided to, let's ask Odin to initiate me. No, that is not what happened. I learned it technically originally from a familiar that was placed by Lord Agarus, and not by any of the Norse/Germanic deities. So it is certainly possible to learn or begin to learn a system from a deity who is not necessarily of that particular pantheon with which that system is normally associated. So I would absolutely feel that Thoth is a very safe, very sound, very understanding being to go to for initiation into various magical systems. He can basically help you with any sort of science, logical and arcane. He can provide, as I have personal experience with, familiars that are actually pretty good. They usually, from my experience, at least in my personal interactions with him, he will say that, okay, there's a time limit to when your familiar will be placed. This is, again, in my experience. Other people may have experiences, but he happens to know that I, personally have a bit of negative experiences from past lives with familiars. So maybe that's the reason why he does it with me, So I personally believe it's a sound thing to not have a familiar with you for all eternity unless the contract gets canceled, because the risk, quote unquote, of you not being able to figure out what exactly is wrong with you unless you get into magic in a particular lifetime is, in my personal opinion, just too great. And it is frankly a little irresponsible, as I have mentioned throughout other videos, in terms of, towards your own future potential incarnations, if you have any after this, which most people will likely do. So, I myself have, for example, contacted Thoth for a familiar regarding mathematics, because that is a field that I have historically, throughout this current life, struggled with. I am someone who is very right-brained. I mean, I make art, music, and stuff like that, and I do, engage a lot with psychology, like I said, because I'm studying to be a psychologist. But this is, of course, also partially learning how to understand human behavior and interpreting emotions, and which is also, part of the creative side of things, of course. So I found it to my benefit to have a familiar that assists me with mathematics to help me increase my my willingness to engage with it, to not be so deterred by it, because I have historically been rather poor at it, to also help me retain information, to pick it up better, to retain it better, to remember it better, and to help me study better for tests that I'm taking in that regard. When I am discussing and negotiating these contracts with Thoth, what usually happens is he'll say, okay, you got to do a couple tasks for me up front, write a contract, and in the contract that we will put that if you complete this X or Y task for me, then I will do Z for you. So that is usually how he, in my experience, handles such things. He wants you to pay up front. Usually it is, as I said, very fair payment, a very fair, reasonable pricing that he gives away. And then he will, for a limited time, in terms of familiars, place a familiar with you. In my case, it was like 2-3 years, I believe. So, these are all things that you can go to Thoth for, like I said, for magic, for hard sciences, logical sciences, for being initiated into systems, for having spells performed on your behalf by him even, which is a point I forgot to mention. For familiars, that sort of thing. So he can help you basically with a very wide variety of things that you, as a magician, but also as perhaps a student or an aspiring, doctorate holder, are going to, benefit from in various ways. So I would describe Thoth really as just the scholars, or the wise man's god, if you will. But also, if you are not necessarily someone who's really hardcore into magic, if you are someone who is not really into hard sciences, Thoth can still very strongly assist you in terms of diplomacy, because as I said, throughout the Egyptian mythologies, you will see that he is someone who takes the place often as mediator, as arbiter, stuff like that, where he's either a judge or a referee almost. But if you have an interest in healing, if you have an interest in being, for example, a diplomat, a judge, a lawyer, or some other person dealing with legalities, legislation, settling of disputes in any way, shape, or form, and this can even extend to being a fair and honest referee in, I don't know, sports, soccer, for example. These are all professions in which in which Thoth can assist you, because he is historically and mythologically speaking a referee, an arbiter, a judge, and you will be usually paired up with a familiar to that end, or have spells performed on your behalf to assist you in your endeavors, in your pursuits, both career and magic-wise, in that sense. If you are someone who has issues, for example, retaining memory, very handy for people who may perhaps have ADHD or ADD or something along those lines, or who may be a little up in years, who may have like early onset issues with memory or something along those lines. Now, of course, I have to always preface this as being an aspiring psychologist. Magic is never a replacement treatment for physical issues, which you should consult an expert for. But from a magical, spiritual perspective, I can recommend Thoth to people who have issues with memory. They can perhaps receive a familiar or spells performed on their behalf to help them retain information, or to have in my experience, what usually happens is that you will have a sort of like a scribe familiar placed with you, because again, Thoth is, of course, and we will be getting into that a little bit later as well, a god of scribes, a god of writing, a god of the written word. But he can therefore probably also place a familiar with you who may take notes of important things, and who may then just subtly help you remember important issues and important important events and stuff like that, where you basically just have the familiar give you subtle hints like, hey, remember tomorrow you have a wedding to attend, or something like that. And like I said, he is a god of writing, of scribes. So if you are an aspiring novelist, or if you are a journalist, or if you are someone who I don't know, writes columns for a blog or for a magazine in some way, shape, or form, Thoth could be consulted to have a you know, again, a familiar or scribes, or a familiar scribe, I should say, or perhaps a being who was in life a writer, who may also therefore be able to assist you with creative ideas and stuff like that. You may, again, have spells performed on your behalf to assist you with creativity, to assist you with writing, to write eloquently, to pay attention to your grammar, to pay attention to how you build up sentences, to how you unfold plots, how you unfold, you know, basically your theses. If you are in college, if you are pursuing a doctorate, for example, and you have to write theses, or if you have to write you know, papers or something along those lines, Thoth can absolutely assist you in all these things. Again, Thoth is a very scholarly deity who will absolutely be invaluable to the magician slash the student slash the you know, the professional even, who has an interest or need for such capabilities. Lastly, as I mentioned briefly earlier in the video, Thoth is also a deity that you will want to consult if you are someone who works to the betterment of others, whether that is being a person who works with natural medicine, whether that is someone who works in you know, as a physician, or as someone who is a surgeon, you know, basically anything that has to do with physical health, with physical well-being, and the looking after people who may have issues with such things, such as all the aforementioned professions and fields of practice that I mentioned. Thoth can, from a magical perspective, from an energetic perspective, from a mental perspective, assist, of course. That is not to say that you should just, you know, think, oh, I got a familiar now, I will always know what I'm doing. That is obviously not the case. And I'm saying that for the benefit of all your future potential patients, you know. But basically how all this stuff works, as I outline in my familiars video, what basically will happen is that this familiar will motivate you to be more studious, will make you more interested in it, make you more excited about it, will lead you subtly to particular points of information that you will want to retain, that you will want to pay special attention to. They will help you retain information in general better. They will help you pick things up better, but at the end of the day, you will still need to do the legwork and still need to put in the effort, and still need to you know, actually make sure that you carry things out properly. So again, do not think that, because this is of course very dangerous, potentially dangerous you know, issues that we are tangling with here, because if you are a surgeon and you know, through whatever ignorant mindset decides to contact Thoth and get a familiar to help you become a better surgeon, sure, he'll gladly do that. But if you are going to the operation table and you just start tinkering, thinking, you know, oh, okay, all right, well, you know, but I'm assuming that by the point that you get to be a surgeon, that you have a license and all that, that you are gonna know what you're doing anyway. But if you are pursuing such a career, you know, just please do be aware that magic is not a, you know, fix-it-all, or is not going to substitute for your lack of interest in, you know, being a proper scholar in such a field, being a proper responsible professional, I suppose. So please do keep that in mind. I'm not going to be held responsible if you decide to misuse magic, and that should be a given for any and all of these videos that I upload. So please be careful with that, because obviously you're not just affecting yourselves, you're not just affecting, you know, your own credibility as a professional or a future professional, but you're also going to be affecting, you know, the lives of others, likely negatively if you botch it. So lastly, what I would like to outline as a you know, what I would like to outline last is a brief summary of potential offerings that you could give Thoth, so that if you perhaps wish to contact him for you know, various bargains, deals, requests, what have you, or if you just, you know, wish to honor Thoth because you happen to work with the Egyptian pantheon, but you don't normally you know, work with Thoth in and of itself. Offerings for Thoth are like many Egyptian gods, actually. This is a list of general offerings to Egyptian deities that seem to be acceptable from what I have heard in my research. Beer, bread, and barley. These are three common offerings to Egyptian deities. But for Thoth personally, writing tools such as feathers, pens, ink, books, notepads, spell books, what have you, literature, help textbooks about scientific subjects, I suppose. Uh, all those sorts of things, anything that has to do with writing, anything that has to do with magic, anything that has to do with any and all of his areas of expertise and the areas in which he presides over in his given pantheon. These are all offerings that you can give him, basically. Dedicating some of your magical tools, dedicating some of your magical practices to Thoth, or hell, maybe even striving to be a good medical professional or a good scientist. Doing that in honor of Thoth will absolutely bring him happiness and gladness, I suppose, in that sense. Colors that are related to Thoth are blue, due to the association with the blue ibis that he wears on his head, in particular royal blue. Purple, due to the association, at least this is an association that I personally drew. The upper two chakras are usually depicted as indigo and violet, or purple and pink, or depending on, it seems to depend a little who you ask. Usually I see the third eye as a bit more indigo, and then the crown chakra to me is usually violet. Purple is something that I find very interesting because it is obviously the crown chakra and or the mind's eye or the third eye or the Aina chakra. These are, obviously the tools that you use for being a writer, for being a scientist, using the mind in various ways. So I find that a very fitting color for him, and that is, if you look around, actually a color that is often apparently attributed to Thoth. Lastly, silver, due to his association with being a lunar deity and being the god of the moon. That concludes my brief video on my basic guide to Thoth, shall we say. Of course, there is much more to say about this particular deity. He's very well documented, very well recorded, both in the mythologies and by other occultists and magic users. But this is not what this video is for. It's meant to be a brief guide, of course, just like this entire series will be, to a particular deity, what they stand for, and what their areas of expertise are. And I hope it's been of service, as always. And thank you so much for watching. I hope to catch you in the next video. Whatever that is going to be, I have frankly no idea right now. I guess we'll see. So whatever it's going to be, see you in the next video. Like, comment, subscribe. And again, thank you so much for watching. Hell.